Are you ready, Mr. Bennett?
Absolutely, yep.
All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Know the 10 Signs Early Detection Matters. Alzheimer's and other dementias cause changes in memory, thinking, and behavior that interfere with daily life. Join us to learn about the 10 common warning signs and what to watch for in yourself and others. Presented by the Alzheimer's Association's very own Philip Bennett.
All right. My name is Phil Bennett. I am manager of education and community volunteers at the Alzheimer's Association, the Illinois chapter. And we do a host of different education programs. Some of you may have heard of the association and may be familiar with the education programs. The one that we're going to do tonight is called Know the 10 Warning Signs Early Detection Matters. I think the main point here is for us to talk about what those 10 warning signs are. But before we get into that, I do want to talk just a little bit about some statistics. So right now, over 5 million Americans are affected by Alzheimer's disease. Over 230,000 of them live right here in Illinois. Okay, that's a pretty large number. So 230,000 people are in Illinois are affected, and that number rose about 16% during COVID. Um, as we go through the education program, I am going to talk a bit about my experience with Alzheimer's. Is both of my grandparents, both of my grandmothers have had Alzheimer's. One has passed away, and I have one who's living with it now. So I'll share some of the experiences that I had, but I want to go ahead and begin and jump into the presentation here, and I'll actually start that right now. So this is a letter that we got from a gentleman by the name of Jay Smith. Okay. His wife was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. So early onset Alzheimer's means that you developed Alzheimer's before the age of 65. Okay. So 64 and under, that means that you developed it at an early age. Okay. So his wife developed early onset Alzheimer's, and they were seeing some of the warning signs, and what they failed to do was to go get tested or go see about things. And pretty much they're saying that if they would have had a correct diagnosis just 2 years earlier, they could have planned pretty much for their future. So they could have put a trust in place. They could have talked about who they wanted to be the power of attorney of finance or power of attorney over medical. They could have done things on their bucket list like travel or different things like that. But them not being able to do that, the disease pretty much snuck up on them faster than they thought it would be, and caused pretty much an interruption in their life, causing everything to slow down or come to a halt. So early detection is very important. So if you do start and see some of those signs, I'll talk about a specialist and who that specialist is that you would need to see. So we're going to hear a few testimonies and hear from people like us. They'll talk about the disease. And this is Marianne, and she's going to talk a bit about the disease right now and how we're going to be a part of the change.
With a disease that takes yourself, that's pretty scary stuff. And I think that the next wave of people, with the help of the association, the next wave of this disease is going to be to not be the only one who has it. That we're going to get comfortable enough, and if we who can speak enough, and people say, well, she's not shirking, she can put two words together. She's still living. She's still out there. He's still talking. She's still writing. And there are people doing all of this. Then I think the stigma, because that's a word we haven't said, will be lessened. I think it will be diminished. We don't blame people for having cancer. We don't turn the other way. We have historically done that with Alzheimer's disease. And I think that day is gone, and I think that we who live now and know about this are going to be part of the change.
So what Marianne is talking about is being a part of the change. It's pretty much not being afraid to talk about it. She's saying that pretty much people aren't afraid to talk about cancer if they have cancer, but there's this stigma there where people are embarrassed to talk about Alzheimer's, or they feel this embarrassment if they have Alzheimer's. There's another thing that comes to mind when I think about my grandmother, where people are afraid to talk about it, is that many times, well, I'll give an example here with my grandmother. When she began to notice some signs, what she did was she told my parents, and immediately they wanted to stop her from driving and stop her from cooking, and wanted her not to live alone and things like that. So she was still able to do those things, but they wanted to stop her. So then when she would make mistakes or have certain memory lapses or things, she wouldn't tell anyone. So that's some of the things that happens as well, when we talk about being a part of that change. But now I want to talk about Alzheimer's disease versus just getting older. So Alzheimer's disease versus just typical aging. And I'll ask a question here, and this is a question that I usually ask. And just by, I guess you can put in something in the chat or something like that, but who's ever walked in a room and forgot why you walked in there, right? Or who has more than one child, and sometimes you call a child the other child's name or something like that. So those type of things a lot of times causes, especially seniors, to be afraid, to be fearful, and they wonder like, oh, am I getting Alzheimer's and things like that. So this topic here, I'm going to talk about Alzheimer's disease versus just getting older. So here's some myths versus reality. So the first myth is having a little touch of dementia is a typical part of aging. All right, that is a myth. Now, the reality is, as we age, our physical capabilities as well as our memory, that will diminish a bit, but it does not mean that we have Alzheimer's disease. So pretty much you're not going to be 80 years old and be as sharp as you were when you were 20, but it does not mean that you have Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of times I get the question where people say, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? All right, so I'm gonna break it down to you in this way. Dementia is a decline in your cognitive behavior. Dementia is a decline in your cognitive thinking. Now, there's over 70 types of diseases. 70 types of dementias. So there's over 70 types of dementias. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia that we hear about. And what Alzheimer's does, it affects your memory, your thinking, as well as your behavior, but it's not limited to those things because it also affects mobility, okay? So there is no treatment, and there is no cure for Alzheimer's. This is a fatal disease. And at this time, a lot of people, they ask questions like, well, can I take coconut oil? Or what if I get ginkgo pills and different things like that? So you can't do those things. Unfortunately, there's nothing that is available to actually cure the disease or slow the disease down at this time. Another question that I get is people will say, well, how is this disease fatal if you're just losing your memory? So how is it fatal? Well, what happens is there's actually 7 stages of Alzheimer's, and we break them down into 3 parts. That's early, middle, and late stage. And what happens is a late stage is a person with Alzheimer's actually forgets how to swallow. Okay, that's pretty scary stuff. Many times as well as we have to think about that the brain is actually deteriorating. So with the brain deteriorating, what happens is the brain is no longer telling the body what to do. So we'll see people with Alzheimer's become easily susceptible to developing different viruses or diseases, different things like that. And their immune system is not telling them to fight off certain viruses like the common cold. So someone with Alzheimer's could pass away from the common cold in that late stage. So that's how the disease becomes fatal. They're actually passing away from those symptoms of the disease. So another myth is if I have memory loss, that means I have Alzheimer's or dementia. That is false. But reality is many people do have trouble with their memory, but it does not mean that they have Alzheimer's disease, and most do not. And it's always best to visit with a doctor to determine what is the cause of the memory loss. So there's many things that affect your memory. Some of those things are stress, could be a head injury. But the biggest thing that I talk about is medication. Medication affects your memory. So medication definitely affects the memory, and you could be removed from that medication, and your memory is pretty much restored to its normal state. So there's many things that could affect your memory: thyroid abnormalities, immune deficiencies, even urinary tract infection, UTIs. Those could also affect your memory and play a part. So let's talk about some of the risk factors. And one of the biggest risk factors here is age. So when you're 80 years old, there is a 50% chance that you can develop Alzheimer's. So I do want to state that there's really nothing you can do to avoid it. You can lower the risk of it, but some people say, well, what can I do to avoid this? If you have a brain, you are at risk of developing it. Okay, you can definitely lower the risk factors, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. But at the age of 80, you are 50%, there's a 50% chance you may develop it. We also see a higher incidence in women, and that's largely due to women living longer than men. So Alzheimer's disease runs in your family. Genetic testing will tell you whether you will get Alzheimer's disease too. That is a myth. Alzheimer's disease is not a hereditary disease. So just because mom had it or dad had it or brother had it, it does not mean that you will develop Alzheimer's, okay? Now, if one parent had it, it puts you at a low risk of having it. And if both parents had it, it just puts you at a bit higher risk, but it does not mean that you will develop Alzheimer's. It's not a hereditary gene, but we do know that the ApoE4 gene is linked to Alzheimer's disease, okay? Now, this type of dementia is pretty much common with old age. Also, it's a good idea to discuss the benefits and risk of testing with a physician. Many times people want to get something that's called genetic testing to see if they have this ApoE4 gene, okay? Now, with this gene, we always recommend that you speak with a genetic counselor before getting tested. Now, the Alzheimer's Association does not recommend getting tested because it doesn't predict that you'll have Alzheimer's, but something that it will do is stress you out. So you'll be a very stressed out person wondering if you'll have it or not, but it doesn't predict that you will develop Alzheimer's. So on this slide, we're going to talk about body and brain connection. So whatever you put in your body pretty much affects your brain. All right, so brain health comes from a healthy body, learning new things, healthy eating, and an active social life. So that means reading, word puzzles, different things like that helps to lower the risk of developing Alzheimer's. Working out, not moderate. You don't have to work out vigorously, but moderately, working out whatever you could. If that's a walk around the block, or if that's walking on a treadmill, but it doesn't have to be a marathon. Doing some type of exercises and putting these together with healthy eating actually helps to lower the risk of developing Alzheimer's. Now, risk for Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia is increased by a damaged heart or blood vessels. So vascular dementia is pretty much when a person has many strokes. So a person can have many strokes and it could affect their vascular system and become vascular dementia, okay? Diabetes in midlife can possibly lead to Alzheimer's disease decades later. So diabetes by the age of 50 could possibly lead to Alzheimer's when you're 80 years old or so, okay? There's also a strong link between serious head injury and risk for dementia. So I think about people who play contact sports with this. So people who play football or hockey or lacrosse and different things like that, where a person could get injured. Also, people who may have been exposed to some type of traumatic brain injury. Okay, these type of things can lead to some form of dementia years down the line. So here is the main event that we want to talk about. 10 warning signs. So I do want to let you know that if you see 2 or more of these warning signs, that means that you may need to see a specialist. And that specialist will be a neurologist, or if you're of age, a gerontologist or a geriatrician. Okay. So if you see 2 or more of these warning signs, as I go through these, if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt and ask the question. So the first one here is memory changes that disrupts daily life. So forgetting something recently learned, asking the same information over and over, or relying on memory aids or family members for things you used to handle alone. So I can look at this and I can think, wait, this could possibly be me. So I use memory aids to remind me of things, and sometimes family members remind me of things like, hey, you said this, or you need to do this, or whatever happened to this. So but it's more severe than that. Okay, so it's not about losing your keys. Many times people think, well, if losing their car keys or their house keys, pretty much they begin to wonder if they have Alzheimer's. But it's more than that. It's about having your car keys in your hand and going to your car and you're like, how do I get in this thing? Okay. It's about you working 20 plus years at a tech company or so, or working on computers, and you get to your computer and you sit at your desk and you're like, how do I turn this thing on? So that's memory changes that disrupts daily life. This is Sue, and Sue is going to talk about her strategy.
Well, I have a strategy I'm supposed to use. I have a hard time remembering to do it. But I have an apron, and I have a tape recorder that I can stick in one pocket, and a pad and a pencil in the other. And if I would just really be good at using that, I'd be in better shape. But that's my strategy for trying to remember what I wanted to do and what people said to me and that kind of thing.
So pretty much Sue has a strategy where she says she's going to wear an apron around the house, have a pen and pad on one side, a tape recorder on the other side. And whenever she wants to do something, then she'll write it down so that she can remember it. But what happens is she forgets to use her strategy. All right. So the second warning sign here is challenges in planning or solving problems. So problems developing or following a plan, problems working with numbers, problems following a familiar recipe, difficulty keeping track of bills, challenges concentrating or taking longer than before to do common tasks. So this is the third one here. So difficulty completing familiar tasks. So that means difficulty completing daily tasks, trouble driving to once familiar places, problems managing a budget at work, or difficulty remembering rules of a favorite game. Now, this one stands out to me. So the second one there that said trouble driving to once familiar places. The Alzheimer's Association has something that's called a 24/7 helpline. And you can call at any time and speak with an information specialist or a master level counselor, and they can assist you with different information or things that may be going on. But I remember when I worked there before my position now, and I spoke with the lady, and she said that I've been living at my home for 15 plus years and been going to my church for 20 plus years. And she says that it takes me 20 minutes to get to church, but 3 hours to get home. Okay, so that is definitely one of the warning signs. This is Joyce, and Joyce is going to talk about one of her biggest challenges.
The biggest challenge is in reading and in doing simple tasks like just counting change. That's really hard for me. I can balance a checkbook. If someone gives me a series of coins, I have a hard time really figuring out how much change I should get. That's so, for somebody with a PhD, that's like crazy. And I think it's hard for me to come to grips with that.
That story gets me every time, because I think about how Joyce has a PhD and how I aspire to get my PhD, but it shows that there is pretty much no way that you can actually dodge this. So if you can lower the risk, but there's even with having the highest degree that you can achieve, she still developed it. So if you were to give her $1 and ask for 30 cents, she may have trouble counting those coins. So confusion with time or place. This is a big one here. So losing track of dates, seasons, and passage of time, or forgetting where one is or how one got there. This usually can happen with something that's called wandering. And many of you may have heard of wandering. Wandering is when you unconsciously leave some place and you come to and you're like, how did I get here? All right. And that often happens with someone around the time that's called sundowning. Sundowning is pretty much when dusk comes. A person with Alzheimer's get a heightened sense of confusion. So you may see them fighting or hallucinating or having delusions, and it's 1 or 3 in the morning. These type of things happen, and this is definitely some of the warning signs. In fact, my grandmother is actually experiencing this a lot right now, where she's having hallucinations and delusions. So the 5th one here is trouble understanding visual images in spatial relationships. Okay, so diminishing ability to track visual surroundings, difficulty reading, trouble judging distance, problems determining color or contrast. So this is definitely big for someone who is driving because they're having a hard time understanding that distance between the car and the curb, or the car and the car that may be in front of them, or understanding those guide signs, like stop signs, or which way to go, and things of that nature. So it's very important that we pay attention to signs that we may see from our loved ones who are driving, as far as we're seeing any dents in their cars or any marks in their cars, side view mirrors, knocked off doors, and things like that. So you definitely want to keep an eye out for that. The 6th one here is problems, new problems with words in speaking or writing, or problems following or joining the conversation. Difficulty tracking conversation, like stopping in the middle of a conversation, unable to continue, or repeating what was already said. Also, trouble with vocabulary, difficulty finding the right word, or calling things the wrong name. Now, something that we experienced with my grandmother is sometimes we would see her pick up the remote control to the TV and try to use it as a phone. Okay, so that is definitely some of the warning signs. So here's Joyce again, and she's going to talk about the time where her family noticed that things weren't coming out right.
My sister, who lives in North Carolina, I live in New York, I sent her an email. And apparently she showed it to my brother-in-law. And she called me and said that email made no sense at all. And one of the things that I neglected to tell you was that I would do write emails, things that normally took me about 2 minutes to do. It would take me a half an hour, 45 minutes. And I'd have to read it over, and there was no guarantee it was okay. So I had another person at work read over it. And so it was hard. It was hard. And that's when I realized I thought my emails were fine. Then my sister started telling me, and everybody. So I said, it's not, things aren't coming out right.
So the 7th one here, the 7th warning sign is misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. So putting things in unusual places, like wallet in a fruit bowl. A lot of times we hear stories where people will put silverware in the garbage, keys in the freezer. Another one here is having increasing difficulty retracing steps to locate missing items, and also accusing others of stealing. So I often bring up the example that people with us who are suffering from this disease, they get really paranoid and fearful. So sometimes they'll hide money, and what they'll do is they forget that they hid the money. And if it's just you and mom in the house, who stole it? Okay, so who is she accused of stealing? The 8th one here is decreased or poor judgment. So changes in decision making and judgment, poor judgment with money, like giving large amounts to telemarketers, spending more impulsively, wearing clothing inappropriate to weather or season. So there's a pretty popular story that goes around the Alzheimer's Association where we talk about, we give an example, I'll say, of a lady who called in and she said, my mom has been watching info commercials all night and she's bought over 50 blenders. Okay, so things like that is definitely one of the warning signs. The ninth one here is withdrawal from work or social activities. So withdrawing from hobbies, social activities, work projects, family gatherings, losing track of a favorite sport, forgetting how to engage in a favorite hobby, or avoiding social situations altogether. A person with Alzheimer's, they still have a sense of self. So they understand I'm not who I used to be. They understand that things aren't coming out right. And many times what that does is that cause them to be embarrassed, or that cause them to be fearful of going places, thinking that they'll be judged, or thinking that they'll make a mistake and people will be correcting them and things like that. So what they do is they withdraw, and most times this does cause depression. So the 10th warning sign here is changes in mood and personality. Okay. So increasingly displaying signs of confusion, suspicion, fear, anxiety, and agitation. So that means that it could have been someone who was very nice, but now they become very mean. Their personality changed to become a very mean person. Or it could be someone who was very mean and now they've become very nice. Also with this, they're easily agitated. So you can't have the water running, the dog barking, the children screaming and running around the house while you're trying to talk to someone who has Alzheimer's. All of these things begin to pull on their attention and they become easily agitated. So what should you do if you yourself or a loved one has Alzheimer's? You definitely want to talk with your family about what you're seeing and thinking. A visit to your primary care physician is indicated. So you can contact your primary care physician or visit your primary care physician and ask for a referral to see a specialist. And that specialist is a neurologist, or if you're of age, a gerontologist or geriatrician. But getting the right treatment as soon as possible is crucial. And so they do have medications that affect the symptoms of the disease, but not the disease itself. So the medications could affect some of those thinking or behavior issues, but it can't slow the disease down or stop the disease. So what we also know is that those medications seem to be more effective in the early stages than the latter stages. So we always tell people that early diagnosis is very important, okay? With it being over 70 different types of dementias, you also want to speak to that specialist to see what form of dementia are you dealing with. It can be frontal temporal dementia, where the frontal lobe of your brain is affected by dementia. It can be mixed dementia, meaning that you can have Alzheimer's as well as vascular dementia. So you can have two or more dementias. It can be Lewy body's dementia, which is similar to Parkinson's, where you see someone with the jitters and different things of that nature. So there's many reasons why you should definitely not put this off if you see some of those warning signs. At this time, I do want to ask, is there any questions or is there anything that I can answer for you at this time before we conclude the education program?
Feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A box.
While I wait to see if there's any questions, what I'll say is that you can contact the Alzheimer's Association at any time. We are here 24 hours a day. You can visit our website at alz.org. And all of that information is right here on the lower part of our screen, where you see our 800 number here, 800-272-3900. And I'll also put that in the chat just in case anyone maybe having trouble seeing that. Or our website, which is alz.org. But also, yes, sir.
Mr. Bennett, you have to change panelists to panelists and attendees.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Thank you for that. So it's 800-272-3900. And our website again is alz.org. All right. I see that Connie raised her hand. All right, let's see. Give me a second. Yes, Connie, do we have the ability to allow Connie to speak?
I don't see Connie anymore. I think it could have been a goodbye wave actually.
Okay,
So it doesn't. I don't believe we have any questions.
okay. All right. Well,
So in that
that-
case, the Orland Park Library wants to thank Mr. Bennett for doing this program. And if you have any last minute remarks, feel free, Mr. Bennett.
no, just feel free to contact us with any questions or anything. We're here 24 hours a day. And thank you for allowing me to speak to you.